My name's Jason Chandler, and until recently, I thought my marriage to Karen was unshakable. We were that couple who'd started with nothing, built our lives together brick by brick. I was in construction, she was in real estate, and it seemed like a perfect match, until it wasn't. Karen's career started taking off a couple of years ago. She got this big break with a top real estate firm and went from working weekends at open houses to selling million-dollar properties. I was proud of her, genuinely. But somewhere along the way, it felt like she started living a life I wasn't part of. Late-night showings, business dinners, client events. I told myself it was just the grind. But things changed. She was glued to her phone more than ever, whispering on calls or texting non-stop. She used to light up when she saw me walk in after work, but now it was like I didn't exist. When I'd ask her about her day, she'd just shrug and say, same old, same old. I didn't push because I figured she was tired, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being shut out. It wasn't until a buddy of mine, Tim, mentioned seeing Karen out one night that I realized how bad things were. He'd spotted her at a bar downtown, laughing with some guy in a suit. Probably a client, I told him, brushing it off. But Tim's face said otherwise. I don't know, man, he said. It looked cozy. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind went in a million directions, trying to justify what Tim said. Karen never mentioned a work meeting that night. She didn't even text to say she'd be late. Was I paranoid, or was there something there? I decided I needed answers. Hiring a private investigator wasn't an easy choice. It felt wrong, like I was betraying the trust one was trying to protect. But my gut wouldn't let it go. I told myself I just needed clarity, proof that nothing was happening, or God forbid, proof that something was. At least then, I'd know where I stood. And so, that's how I ended up waiting for a stranger to tell me about my wife's secrets. The PI didn't take long to deliver. Less than a week after I hired him, I got the first report. It wasn't a smoking gun, yet, but there was enough to unsettle me. Karen had been meeting a man regularly, usually at a coffee shop near her office. His name was Evan, a corporate lawyer. The PI even snapped a picture of them laughing together over coffee, his hand resting just a little too long on hers. When I saw the photo, I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. Karen didn't laugh like that with me anymore. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a work relationship. But the more I stared at that picture, the more I felt the distance between us grow. It wasn't just my imagination. That night, I watched her more closely. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone with a small smile on her face. "Who are you texting?" I asked casually, hoping I didn't sound suspicious. She glanced up at me, her expression turning blank. "Just some work stuff," she said, locking her phone and setting it down. "How was your day?" It felt rehearsed, mechanical. I wanted to ask more, push for details, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I muttered something about a rough day at work and went to bed early. Lying there in the dark, I felt like an outsider in my own life. Karen had always been my best friend, my partner. How did we get here? Was this my fault? Had I been too wrapped up in my work to notice her slipping away? My mind was a storm of doubts, and for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure I wanted to know the truth. Rick called me 3 days later. I remember my heart pounding when I saw his name pop up on my phone. "Jason, I've got something," he said. I don't know if I was ready to hear it, but I told him to go on. He'd followed Karen to a business dinner at a swanky downtown restaurant. She wasn't alone. She was with a guy, mid-40s, slick suit, and the kind of confidence that makes you want to punch someone. Rick said they didn't act like business associates. They laughed, leaned in close, and left together. "Did she go home?" I asked, my voice cracking. Rick hesitated. "No. They went to his place." Hearing that hit me like a ton of bricks. I had to sit down, my head spinning. "Are you sure?" I asked, hoping he'd say he wasn't. "I'm sure," he replied quietly. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I sat in the dark in our living room, staring at the wall, replaying everything Rick said over and over in my mind. This was my wife, the woman I'd built my life with, sneaking around behind my back. I felt sick the next morning. I woke up with a decision. I needed proof. Not for me. I already knew the truth deep down, but for when I confronted her. I didn't want her to twist things or lie her way out of it. I called Rick and told him to keep digging. "I need photos, texts, Anything that'll hold up when she tries to deny it, I said. Rick agreed, and over the next couple of weeks, he sent me everything. Pictures of Karen meeting up with this guy, entering his apartment, even holding his hand in public. One night, Rick told me he'd overheard part of their conversation at a coffee shop. She called him Andrew. She said things like, "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, and Jason's been so clueless." Hearing those words crushed me. Karen wasn't just betraying me, she was mocking me too. At home, she acted like nothing was wrong. She'd still kiss me goodbye before work, still talk about her clients and deals like we were the same old team. But now, every word out of her mouth felt fake. Every time she laughed, it sounded forced. I didn't recognize the woman I married anymore. I kept my cool though. I played my part, acting like I didn't know. Every time she left for another meeting or work dinner, I just smiled and told her to have a good time. Inside though, I was dying that a couple of weeks after Rick first called, I had more evidence than I knew what to do with. Photos, recordings, timelines, I had the whole story. Andrew wasn't just some fling. He was a developer Karen had partnered with on a big project. They'd been seeing each other for months. That night, Karen came home later than usual. She was dressed up, her perfume lingering in the air as she walked past me to the bedroom. I sat there on the couch, clutching my phone, staring at the photos Rick had sent me that day, Karen and Andrew at a hotel downtown. "Everything okay?" she asked from the bedroom. Her voice was casual, like she didn't have a care in the world. "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. "Just tired." I stayed up long after she went to bed, sitting in the living room with my thoughts. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to burst into the bedroom and confront her right then and there, but I held back. I wanted to be strategic. I wanted her lies to come crashing down all at once. The next day, I started making preparations. I copied all the evidence onto a USB drive and backed it up to a secure cloud account. I made an appointment with a divorce attorney, even though the thought of ending my marriage made me feel like a failure. I wasn't ready to pull the trigger yet, but I knew I needed a plan. Once I had the evidence, I knew the confrontation was coming, but I wasn't about to go in without a plan. Karen was clever. She'd always been good at spinning a story when she wanted to. I needed her to walk right into her lies before I dropped the truth. The perfect opportunity came on a Friday night. Karen told me she had a late meeting with a client downtown. Normally, I would have shrugged it off, but this time I saw it for what it was, another excuse. "Do you want me to pick up dinner?" I asked casually while she grabbed her coat. "No, it's okay," she said, barely looking at me. "I'll grab something on the way back." She hesitated, smoothing her hair in the mirror. "Don't wait up." Her tone was so nonchalant it made me feel sick. She kissed my cheek, something she hadn't done in weeks, and walked out the door. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed my phone and called Rick, the PI. "She's on the move," I said. "I'll follow her," he replied. I spent the next few hours pacing the living room, waiting for Rick's update. The minutes dragged like hours, but finally, around 11 p.m., my phone buzzed. "She's with him," Rick said. "Restaurant downtown." Same guy. They've been there for over an hour. My chest tightened. "And now?" "They just left," he said. There was a pause. "Jason, they're heading to his place again." Hearing those words sent a wave of anger through me, but I kept my composure. "Stay on them," I said. "Let me know when she leaves." I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, waiting for the moment she'd walk through the door. Around 1:30 a.m., the lock turned, and Karen tiptoed inside, trying not to wake me. "You're up?" she asked, startled when she saw me sitting in the dark. "Couldn't sleep," I said evenly. "How was your meeting?" She froze for half a second, just long enough for me to catch it, then forced a smile. "It went well. Long though. I'm exhausted." I nodded, watching her closely. "Glad to hear it." She hesitated, probably waiting for me to ask more questions, but I didn't. Instead, I let her disappear into the bedroom, carrying the weight of her lies with her. That night, I made up my mind. The next time she left to see him, I'd be ready the next morning. Karen acted like everything was fine. She hummed while making coffee, scrolled through her phone, and asked me about my plans for the day. I played along, keeping my answers short. Inside, though, I was fuming. Later that afternoon, she mentioned she'd be heading out again in the evening, another last-minute meeting. She even gave me a sweet smile, The kind that used to make me feel lucky to have her. Now it just felt rehearsed. I nodded. No problem. Do what you need to do. By the time she left, I already had Rick on standby. She just left, I told him. I'll follow her, he replied, his tone steady as always. It didn't take long for Rick to confirm what I suspected. Karen wasn't meeting a client, she was meeting Andrew. This time, they didn't even bother with a restaurant. They went straight to his apartment. I grabbed my keys and left the house, my heart pounding the entire drive. I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do when I got there, but I couldn't sit around anymore. Rick sent me the address, and within minutes, I was standing outside Andrew's building, staring up at the lit windows. My hands were shaking as I hit the buzzer for his unit. Yeah, a man's voice answered. It's Jason, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Karen's husband. There was silence on the other end, then a faint, Karen, it's for you. I heard muffled voices before the buzzer buzzed and the door clicked open. My pulse raced as I stepped into the building and climbed the stairs, one slow step at a time. When I reached the door, it was already ajar. Karen stood there, her face pale as a ghost. Jason, she started, her voice trembling. I held up a hand to stop her. Don't, I said coldly. Don't even try. Andrew appeared behind her, looking uncomfortable but trying to play it cool. Look, man, he started. Shut up, I snapped, glaring at him. This doesn't concern you. Karen stepped forward, her hands out like she was calming a wild animal. Jason, please, let's just talk about this. Talk. I laughed bitterly. Like how you've been talking to me for months. Lying to my face while sneaking off to be with him. She flinched, tears welling up in her eyes. I'm sorry. You're sorry. My voice rose, echoing in the hallway. You're sorry now that you've been caught? Andrew cleared his throat, but I didn't even look at him. I focused entirely on Karen. I gave you everything, I said, my voice breaking. I trusted you. I built a life with you. And this is how you repay me. Karen started to cry, but I didn't care. I turned and walked away, leaving her and Andrew standing there in stunned silence. I didn't look back as I left the building, but the sound of her crying followed me down the stairs. The drive home felt like a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached, but I barely noticed. Karen's face, her panicked expression when she saw me at the door, was burned into my mind. I didn't know if I was more angry, hurt, or just numb. When I walked into the house, it felt foreign. The place we'd built together suddenly seemed hollow, like a stage where the illusion of our life had played out. Her coat was still hanging by the door, her shoes neatly lined up next to mine. I stared at them for what felt like forever before heading to the bedroom. I grabbed a suitcase and started throwing her things into it. Shirts, jeans, dresses. I didn't care what went in. I just needed her out of my space. Halfway through, I stopped and sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. The adrenaline from the confrontation had worn off, leaving a hollow ache in its place. A notification buzzed on my phone. It was a text from Karen. Jason, please. Let me explain. I'm on my way home. Don't do anything rash. I didn't respond. I couldn't. About 20 minutes later, I heard her car pull into the driveway. The front door creaked open, and her footsteps echoed through the house. She appeared in the bedroom doorway, her face streaked with tears, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Jason, she whispered. Can we talk? I didn't look at her. Your suitcase is there, I said, nodding toward the half-packed bag. Her lip trembled. You're kicking me out? I'm asking you to leave, I corrected, my voice cold. You can stay with him, can't you? That's what you wanted, isn't it? Her face crumpled, and she took a step closer. No, Jason, I never wanted this. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but I love you. Please just let me explain. I finally looked up at her, my jaw tight. Explain what? That you've been lying to me for months? That you've been sneaking around with another man while I sat here like a fool, trusting you? She dropped to her knees in front of me, clutching my hands. I was stupid, Jason. I let things go too far, and I didn't know how to stop. But I never stopped loving you. You have to believe me. Her words were desperate, but they felt empty. I pulled my hands away and stood up, towering over her. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She stayed there on the floor, sobbing, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Instead, I walked out of the room and left her there, the woman I'd once thought I'd spend my life with, now a stranger I couldn't trust. I didn't leave the house that night, though every part of me wanted to. It felt like walking away would be giving Karen the control she didn't deserve anymore. Instead, I sat in the living room while she stayed in the bedroom, crying. Her sobs echoed faintly down the hall, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. Not anymore. Around midnight, I heard her footsteps approaching. I glanced toward the doorway as she entered the room, her face pale, eyes swollen, and hair disheveled. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had kissed me goodbye just hours earlier, walking out to meet another man. "Jason," she said softly, her voice raw. "I know you hate me right now. You have every right to. But please, don't give up on us." I leaned back in the chair, crossing my arms. "Us?" I asked, my tone sharp. "There is no us, Karen. The second you decided to sneak around behind my back, you ended us." She flinched, but she didn't give up. "I messed up," she admitted. "I got caught up in something I didn't know how to get out of. I know that doesn't excuse it, but it's the truth." I shook my head, the anger bubbling up again. "You didn't know how to get out of it? What does that even mean, Karen? You were perfectly fine getting into it. You had no problem lying to my face, sneaking around, meeting him in hotels, in his apartment. So don't stand here and tell me you were trapped. You weren't. You made choices." She sank onto the couch across from me, her hands trembling. "I'm not trying to make excuses," she said. "I know I hurt you, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I wasn't trying to replace you, Jason. I wasn't unhappy with you." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, so you cheat on me because you're happy? Makes perfect sense." She reached out like she wanted to touch me but stopped herself. "It wasn't like that," she insisted. "I don't even know how it started. At first, it was just work. We were talking about clients and projects, and then, I don't know. One day, I realized I'd crossed a line. I didn't mean to, Jason. I swear." I felt my chest tighten. Her words sounded rehearsed, like she'd been building this story in her head, preparing for the day she'd have to justify it. "So what was it?" I asked, leaning forward. "What did he give you that I couldn't? Attention? Excitement? Did you just get bored of me?" "No," she said quickly, her voice rising. "It wasn't like that. It was stupid, Jason. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I shot back, standing up. "You threw away our marriage for something that didn't mean anything? Do you even hear yourself right now?" Tears streamed down her face as she looked up at me. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said. "But I'm begging you to give me a chance to make this right. Please, Jason. Don't throw everything away because of one mistake." I stared at her, my heart pounding. Her words were desperate, but they weren't enough. Nothing she said could undo the damage. "You don't get to ask me to fix this," I said coldly. "You're the one who broke it." I turned and walked toward the door, grabbing my keys. Karen stood up, panic flashing across her face. "Where are you going?" "For a drive," I said without looking back. "Don't be here when I get back." I drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring as my mind raced. Memories of Karen flooded my thoughts, our first date, our wedding day, the time we spent building this life together. I couldn't reconcile those memories with the woman who had betrayed me so completely. At some point, I pulled over into an empty parking lot and sat there in the dark. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to feel anything other than the hollow ache that had settled in my chest. But all I could do was sit there, gripping the steering wheel, my mind replaying her words over and over. When I finally made it home, it was close to dawn. The house was silent, and Karen was gone. Her suitcase was missing, and a note was on the kitchen counter. "Jason, I'm staying with a friend. Please, when you're ready, let me explain everything. I love you." I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. She'd made her choices, and now I had to make mine. The silence in the house was deafening. For the first time in years, it felt like a stranger's home, empty and unfamiliar. I wandered into the bedroom, the place that had been ours for so long, and noticed little gaps everywhere. Her jewelry box missing, her favorite coat gone from the closet, the framed photo of us on the dresser turned face down. Part of me felt relief that she'd left like I asked, but the other part felt hollow. This was the woman I'd shared everything with, and now she was just gone. I spent the morning trying to keep busy. I cleaned the kitchen, rearranged the living room, even went out and ran errands I'd been putting off for weeks. But no matter what I did, my mind kept drifting back to Karen. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my brother, Mike. "You okay, man?" Karen texted me. Said you two were having a rough time. I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. Of course, she'd try to get to me through family. That was Karen, always looking for a way to control the narrative. I replied, "I'm fine. Don't worry about it." Not 2 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Mike. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but figured he'd just keep calling. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Okay, what's going on?" he asked. "Karen's blowing up my phone, saying she needs help fixing things with you." "What happened?" "She cheated," I said flatly. There was silence on the other end. "What?" "She's been having an affair for months. I caught her." End of story. "Jesus, Jason," Mike said, his voice low. I had no idea. "Are you okay?" "Not really," I admitted. "But I'll get through it." Mike sighed. "Do you need anything? Want me to come over?" "No," I said quickly. "I just need space right now." "All right," he said reluctantly. "But if you change your mind, call me. Any time." "I will," I said, though I doubted I'd take him up on it. That evening, Karen texted again. "Jason, I'm sorry to reach out, but I need to talk to you. Please. Just one conversation." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore her, but another part, the part that still needed answers, felt compelled to respond. "What do you want?" I finally typed. Her reply came almost instantly. "I just want to explain. I owe you that much." I agreed to meet her the next day. Not because I wanted to fix anything, but because I needed closure. I needed to hear her admit everything, to lay it all out so there was no room for doubt. We met at a quiet park, far from our neighborhood. Karen was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as I approached, her face pale and tired. "Jason," she said softly. I didn't respond. I sat down on the opposite end of the bench, keeping a noticeable distance between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she broke the silence. "Thank you for coming. Get to the point," I said. "Why did you do it?" She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know," she said finally. "It started out innocent, just work stuff. But then it became more, and I didn't know how to stop." "You didn't know how to stop?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "You didn't want to stop, Karen. That's the truth." Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded. "You're right," she admitted. "I let it happen because it was easy. He was there. And you were always busy, always tired. I felt like we were drifting apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. So you cheated instead," I said, my anger rising. "You didn't try to talk to me, didn't try to fix anything. You just went behind my back and lied to my face." "I know I hurt you," she said, her voice shaking. "And I'll never forgive myself for it. But I swear, Jason, it didn't mean anything. It was a mistake." I stared at her, my chest tightening. "A mistake is forgetting to lock the door, Karen. What you did was a choice. Over and over again." She looked down at her hands, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry doesn't fix this," I said, standing up. "It doesn't undo the lies, the betrayal, the months I spent thinking everything was fine while you were with him." "Jason, please," she said, reaching out to me. "I love you. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I shook my head, stepping back. "You can't make this right, Karen. It's over." Her sobs followed me as I walked away, leaving her alone on the bench. After walking away from Karen at the park, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, relief, sadness. It wasn't the kind of clean break I'd hoped for, but it was clear that the damage was irreversible. The life we'd built together was gone, and now I had to figure out what came next. The first step was telling people the truth. I'd kept everything quiet, partly because I wasn't ready for the pitying looks and awkward conversations, but also because I hadn't fully processed it myself. Now though, I needed to take control of the narrative before Karen started spinning her own version. Went to my parents' house that evening. My mom opened the door, her face lighting up in surprise. "Jason, we weren't expecting you. Come in." As soon as I stepped inside, I could feel the warmth of home, the faint smell of her cooking, the sound of the TV in the background. It was comforting, but it also made the weight of what I was about to say feel even heavier. "Where's Dad?" I asked. "In the den," she said, studying my face. "Jason, is everything okay? Can you both come to the kitchen?" I said. "I need to talk to you." Her smile faded, and she nodded, calling my dad. They sat across from me at the table, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. "I need to tell you something," I began, my voice steady. "Karen and I are separating." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. My mom gasped, covering her mouth, while my dad leaned forward, his brows furrowing. "What happened?" he asked. "She's been having an affair," I said bluntly. "For months. I found out a few weeks ago." My mom's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Jason. I'm so sorry." Dad clenched his jaw. "That's unbelievable. After everything you've done for her." I shrugged, trying to appear calm. "It is what it is. I just wanted you to hear it from me, not anyone else." They both reached out to comfort me, but I pulled back, shaking my head. "I'm okay," I said. "I just need some time to figure things out." "You don't have to go through this alone," Mom said gently. "Whatever you need, we're here." I nodded, grateful but still overwhelmed. I stayed for dinner, letting them fuss over me like I was a kid again. It didn't fix anything, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. The next step was harder. Karen and I shared a close-knit friend group, and I knew word would get out sooner or later. Instead of letting them hear a twisted version of events, I decided to call a few of them myself. The hardest call was to my best friend, Mark. He and his wife, Sophie, had been part of our lives for years: vacations, holidays, game nights. They'd seen Karen and me as the strong couple, the ones who had it all figured out. When Mark picked up, I cut straight to the chase. "Karen and I are splitting up," I said. "What?" he exclaimed. "Why? What happened?" "She cheated," I said simply. "It's been going on for months. I found out, and now it's over." There was a long pause. "Man, I don't even know what to say," Mark said finally. "I'm so sorry. I can't believe she'd do that to you." "Yeah, well," I said bitterly. "I guess people aren't always who you think they are." We talked for a while, and Mark promised to have my back no matter what. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Friends would pick sides, and no matter how much they tried to stay neutral, things wouldn't be the same that night. I sat in the house alone, surrounded by the ghosts of what used to be my life. Every room reminded me of Karen, her laughter, her touch, the way she used to make the place feel alive. Now it just felt cold and empty. I went to the bedroom and opened the closet. Her side was half empty, but a few of her things still lingered: scarves, a pair of shoes, the jacket she always wore on rainy days. For a moment, I thought about boxing it all up and dumping it on her friend's doorstep. But instead, I closed the door and walked away. I knew healing wouldn't happen overnight. This was just the beginning of a long, painful process. But as I stood there in the silence, I made a promise to myself: I would get through this. Somehow, I would rebuild. A few days passed in relative silence. Karen hadn't texted again, and for a moment, I thought she'd finally accepted things. But late one evening, my phone buzzed. It was her. "Jason, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to see you one last time. Please. Just 5 minutes." I stared at the message, debating. My instinct was to ignore her, but a small part of me wondered if she'd say something that would help me close this chapter for good. Against my better judgment, I replied, "Fine. Tomorrow at noon. Public place." The next day, we met at a quiet cafe. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around as I sat across from her. "Thank you for coming," she began. "I know I don't deserve it." "What do you want, Karen?" I asked, keeping my tone cold. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know how much I regret everything. I ruined the best thing in my life, and I'll never stop regretting that." Her words didn't move me. "You're right, you don't deserve forgiveness," I said. "But I'm not here to hate you, Karen. I'm here to move on." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't stay to watch. I stood, nodded curtly, and walked out, leaving her to sit alone with her guilt. Walking out of that cafe felt like crossing a line I couldn't go back from. Whatever remained between Karen and me was officially over. I'd said my piece, and she tried to apologize, but it didn't change anything. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of relief, a weight lifting, even if only a little. But moving on was easier said than done. Coming home after the meeting was jarring. The house felt even emptier, as though her absence had finally solidified. I walked through the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, taking in how quiet everything was. It wasn't just Karen who was gone, it was the life we'd built together, the routines, the laughter, even the arguments. I couldn't stand the stillness anymore, so I started making changes. I moved the furniture around, took down photos of us, and boxed up anything that reminded me of her. It wasn't about erasing her completely, it was about reclaiming the space as mine. The hardest part was our bedroom. Her scent still lingered faintly on the pillows, and her side of the bed was untouched, as though she might walk in at any moment. I stripped the sheets, opened the windows, and forced myself to make the room feel new. Mark and Sophie stopped by that weekend. Mark had told Sophie everything, and while I wasn't thrilled about being the topic of conversation, I appreciated their support. They brought takeout and insisted we have a movie night like old times. At first, I felt awkward, like I was intruding on their happy marriage. But as the night went on, I realized how much I needed the distraction. For a few hours, I wasn't the guy who'd been cheated on. I was just Jason, hanging out with his friends. When they left, Sophie gave me a hug. "You're stronger than you think," she said softly. "And you deserve better." Her words stuck with me. Maybe I didn't feel strong yet, but I wanted to be. Despite my efforts to move forward, Karen wasn't completely out of my life. She texted a few more times, mostly apologizing or asking if we could talk. I didn't respond. One day, I got a call from Rick, the private investigator. "Hey Jason," he said. "I thought you should know, Karen's still seeing Andrew." I gripped the phone tightly, a wave of emotions washing over me. Part of me was angry that she'd continued the affair, but another part felt vindicated. It confirmed that she hadn't been the person I thought she was. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. After hanging up, I realized something. Her choices weren't my problem anymore. Whatever she and Andrew had, it wasn't my concern. My focus had to be on my own life, not hers. A few weeks later, I finally met with a divorce attorney. Sitting in that office, going over paperwork and logistics, felt surreal. This was the woman I thought I'd grow old with, and now we were dividing assets and planning our separate futures. The attorney was calm and professional, walking me through every step of the process. When it was over, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. This was the end of the life I'd known, but it was also the start of something new. As the weeks turned into months, I started focusing on myself for the first time in years. I threw myself into work, spent more time with family, and even picked up old hobbies I'd neglected. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. There were still moments when I thought about Karen, about the life we'd shared and the future we'd planned. But each day, those thoughts grew fainter. One evening, I sat on the porch with a beer, watching the sunset. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt a spark of hope. The road ahead wasn't clear, but it was mine to walk. And that, at least, was something. The divorce papers arrived on an unremarkable Tuesday morning. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter for hours, unopened. I stared at it while I ate breakfast, while I cleaned up, and even while I absent-mindedly scrolled through my phone. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, maybe a sign, or maybe just the courage to open it and face what was inside. When I finally tore it open, the reality hit me harder than I'd expected. Inside was the final decree, a document that officially ended what had once been the most important relationship in my life. Seeing it in black and white, with both our names neatly typed at the top, felt like a gut punch. This was it. The final step in closing a door I never thought I'd have to shut. Later that day, I got a text from Karen. I hadn't heard from her since our meeting at the park, and seeing her name pop up on my screen made my chest tighten. I hesitated before opening the message. "Jason, I just wanted to thank you for being so understanding throughout all of this. I know I don't deserve it, but I hope one day you can forgive me. I'll always regret the pain I caused you." I stared at the words for a long time, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't quite place. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to let silence be my final word. But another part of me, the part that was tired of carrying around anger and hurt, felt like I needed to respond. I typed slowly, choosing each word carefully. "Karen, I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, but I'm ready to let go of the anger. I need to move on, and I hope you do too. Take care of yourself. It wasn't an olive branch, but it wasn't a slap in the face either. It was the truth, the most I could give her. Her reply came almost instantly. Thank you. That means more to me than you know. I hope you find happiness. You deserve it. I read her message once, then deleted it. There was nothing left to say. About a week later, I ran into her by accident. I was at a coffee shop downtown, flipping through emails on my phone while waiting for my order. When I glanced up, there she was, sitting by the window with Andrew. She didn't see me at first. She was laughing at something he said, her hand resting on his arm. It was strange, seeing her like that. She looked happy, lighter somehow, like the guilt she'd carried during our last conversations had finally lifted. At first I froze, unsure of what to do. My mind raced with old memories, her apologies, and the raw hurt I'd felt not so long ago. But then something unexpected happened. I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just a quiet sense of finality. She was living her life, and I was living mine. When she finally glanced my way, our eyes met briefly. Her smile faded, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. She looked as though she might say something, but I turned away, collecting my coffee and heading for the door. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit my face, and I took a deep breath. Seeing her with him, happy and moving on, should have stung. But instead, it felt like the last chapter of a book I'd been carrying around for far too long. That evening, I found myself on the porch again, a quiet routine I developed over the past few weeks. With a beer in hand, I watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. For the first time, I let myself imagine a future without Karen. Not the hollow, lonely picture I'd feared, but something brighter. I didn't know what it would look like, but I knew it was mine to build. Karen's betrayal had broken me in ways I never thought possible, but it hadn't destroyed me. Piece by piece, I was starting to rebuild. And with each day that passed, the weight of what I'd lost felt a little lighter. As the stars began to dot the night sky, I raised my beer in a quiet toast to myself. To new beginnings, I murmured, the words carrying a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. Months turned into a year, and life began to feel steady again. Not perfect, not the way it once was, but steady. There was a kind of calm in being alone, a chance to figure out who I was outside of the life I'd built with Karen. In the beginning, it had been hard. Even after I packed away her things and rearranged the house, reminders of her lingered. The sound of her favorite song on the radio. The jacket she'd forgotten in the hall closet. The ghost of her laugh in the quiet moments. But as time passed, those reminders began to lose their sting. They became just things, detached from the pain they once carried. Slowly, I began to reclaim my life. Piece by piece, I started saying yes to more things. Mark and Sophie pulled me out of my shell, inviting me to dinners, game nights, even a weekend fishing trip. At first, I felt like the odd one out, the guy with the broken marriage. But over time, I realized that my friends didn't see me that way. They just saw Jason. Work became an unexpected refuge. Throwing myself into projects helped me focus, and with focus came progress. I got a promotion, something I'd been chasing for years but had felt out of reach. It was a reminder that, even when everything else falls apart, some things can still move forward. Then there were the small connections, the barista at my favorite coffee shop who remembered my order, the neighbor who waved as I walked to my car, the woman I struck up a conversation with at a bookstore one afternoon. They weren't life-changing moments, but they reminded me that the world hadn't stopped turning, even if mine had for a while. One Saturday morning, I decided to visit the farmer's market downtown. It was something Karen and I used to do together, but I'd avoided it since the divorce. That day, though, I felt like I was ready. The market was buzzing with life, bright stalls overflowing with produce, the smell of fresh bread wafting through the air, the hum of people chatting and laughing. As I browsed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. That's when I saw her. Not Karen, someone new. She was standing at a stall, inspecting a bundle of flowers. She had a kind smile, the kind that seemed to light up her whole face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a spark of curiosity. I didn't overthink it. I walked up to the stall and casually said, "Those flowers are a good choice." She glanced at me, her smile widening. "You think so?" I was debating between these and the sunflowers. Both are solid options, I said with a small laugh. But these seem to suit you. Her cheeks flushed slightly, and she laughed softly. Well, that's settled then. We ended up talking for a few minutes, just small talk, nothing earth-shattering, but it was enough to leave me smiling as I walked away with my bag of produce. That day wasn't a turning point, but it was a reminder. Life moves on. People come and go. And even after the worst heartbreak, there's still room for something new. I didn't rush into anything after that. I wasn't ready for a new relationship, not yet. But I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that there was more to life than pain, more to life than the scars Karen had left behind. I spent the next few months focusing on myself. I started working out again, took up photography, something I'd always loved but had put aside during my marriage, and even signed up for a cooking class. It wasn't about filling the void Karen had left. It was about rediscovering the parts of me I'd forgotten. One afternoon, I got a message from Mark. Karen and Andrew broke up. Figured you'd want to know. I stared at the text for a while, surprised at how little it affected me. A year ago, I might have felt vindicated or even angry. Now I just felt nothing. I didn't reply. It didn't matter anymore. Karen's choices weren't my burden to carry. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey, I thought about the journey I'd been on. The heartbreak, the anger, the confusion. It had all led me here to this moment. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for the first time, I felt truly at peace. Life wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. I had my friends, my family, my passions, and a future that was mine to shape. I raised my glass to the horizon, a quiet toast to the man I'd become and the life that lay ahead. To new beginnings, I said softly, the words carrying the weight of the past and the promise of what was to come. And with that, I leaned back in my chair, ready to face whatever came next.